Hey guys, Paul here from Meldrum Performance Coaching and the Complete Personal Trainer Podcast. So today, early morning, I had a client, got another 4 today, I think, I don't know. Quite a few clients all booked in. So thought I'd start the day earlier with a podcast just where I kind of talk a little bit more about random programming concepts. So with programming, from speaking to my students, it really is the biggest struggle that everyone kind of has across the board. So the more I can talk about how to deal with different body parts, how to deal with different programming structures, how to use different methodologies to improve your programming 1% at a time, eventually people will become better and better at programming. And it's a constant battle. It's something that I still work on getting better at each and every week. I try and write a new program, like a template. Not that it's something that I just give clients straight up, but I try and write a new program template for a different archetype of client and then try and apply something similar to that after the key parts of individualization. And one thing I have been messing around with a lot now is conditioning programming. So conditioning programming is an area of programming I think is probably the most misunderstood out of all the different areas and subtypes of programming. Like hypertrophy programming is pretty good. It's pretty simple across the board. Work hard, get stronger, get bigger. For strength training, it's pretty similar across the board. Lift increasingly heavier weights for lower reps, and you'll eventually get stronger. There's not really anything that you can argue with about that. So those forms of programming are really, they are done well. There's some people that are doing some amazing work with that. For conditioning, for particular sports and activities, it's not done so well. It's very misunderstood. And so I wanted to touch base with a few particular thoughts that I have in that. So a lot of time with conditioning for sports, it's there's a couple of rules of thumb. There's a couple of things that people say that may or may not be true. The first one is the best conditioning for your sport is to do the sport itself. And you know what? That's pretty correct. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to train someone for a particular sport, they need to play that particular sport. There's no ifs or buts around that. That sport needs to be done. So if someone's doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they need to do Jiu-Jitsu. If someone's doing basketball or soccer or whatever it is, they need to play that sport. It's as simple as that. And that's pretty well understood. The next rule of thumb that everyone says is you just do the big 3 barbell lifts. Well, not everyone. A lot of people say you should do the big 3 barbell lifts and just get strong and things will take care of themselves. Not really the case. Those big 3 lifts, like they do train all the muscle groups, but when someone gets a little bit more advanced, the training needs to become more specific to what they do. For a beginner, once you've hit like a decent level of strength in these movements, which I talked about in the exercise selection, then you can start making your movements more specific. And your movements need to become more specific to the intended activity as you go over time, because movement pattern strength is very specific. You can be a really good squatter and not be that good at doing lunges, for example. So you really need to key in on your exercise selection. Now, with the actual conditioning part, this is where most people get it wrong. So most people think conditioning is, how hard you can push someone doing high intensity intervals. So everyone, because sport is mainly glycolytic in terms of activity. And although this seems to be like not a bad idea, because sport is highly glycolytic, we need to look at the underlying systems underneath that, and we need to also consider that all 3 systems, so anaerobic, aerobic, and ATP-PC, are all working at the same time in sports as anyone is doing it. So all 3 of those systems need to be conditioned, but all 3 of those systems need to be conditioned at different times and different orders. So the biggest thing that I see with conditioning with people training their athletes, and I've seen this even from very high level athletic performance trainers, is that they totally neglect the aerobic system, because the consideration is that the person's going to get enough aerobic work from doing their sport. And this isn't really the case. So I remember I was working with a boxer, and she had done training she obviously did her boxing training. That was fantastic. She loved doing that. And her weight training was done at an athletic performance center. And I looked at the programming, and there's lots of very specific stuff, but she was weak as hell, and she had a really low aerobic capacity. So find out she'd be good for 1-2 rounds of sparring, like 3-minute rounds, and then round 3 to 7 she'd be terrible, and if she ever made it any higher than that, she would just peter out and die. So for her training, that she was doing a lot of explosive work all the time, because explosive work was what was going to carry over the boxing. It absolutely was the right thing to do, but it was just put at the wrong time in the program. This athlete didn't have a big enough base to actually benefit from putting performance on top of that. So her power output exercises were like, tiny amounts of power, because the strength wasn't there to support it, and then was the aerobic recovery. So, because boxing really is power endurance, you want to be able to deliver a knockout punch, but you want to deliver it not once, you want to deliver it as many times as possible until you eventually hit that person. So for most athletes, what you'll find is that you need to layer in some cardiac output training into their programming. So looking at working at 120, 150, 70% of the maximal heart rate for a longer period of time. So for some athletes, up to 60, even up to 90 minutes to create a really good reserve and to create as much adaptations as possible. The cool thing about this is you can actually use this time to do low-level drilling of skill development. There's no rule that says that you have to put them on a treadmill or on a cross trainer and do something like that. So if you're working with a boxer, for example, you can alternate, as long as the heart rate stays up there, between some low-level pad work, low-level bag work, low-level speed bag work. For example, basketball player can do continuous shooting, soccer player can do different drills where they practice the corner, they run, they get the ball, they take it to the other corner, they practice the corner. And what that does is it allows the person to get more sport-specific training, which in terms of technique skills, which is like the most important thing that you can have, and they can do it in an environment that they can do it with a movement pattern that will build their aerobic output relative to the game. Because what's going to happen is it's not going to keep their heart rate at this steady pace, which can happen when you're doing a treadmill or cross trainer. They're going to have little spikes with that activity as well. So it teaches them to learn how to recover in activities. So the next thing with conditioning is we go too hard too soon. So we put people in these really long, highly intense things, where really sport's a quick burst of activity, and it's better to be able to recover faster at a lower intensity to be able to do it again and again and again. So a lot of the intervals I prescribe will be 8 to 12 seconds long with like a 1 to 2 minute recovery, where the athlete actually has to learn the skill to bring their heart rate down. So that's one thing that we consider as well. And then when we're doing this aerobic phase, which we'll stick on for a minute, we also try and make the weight training that they do support that aerobic phase as well. So this is where using strategic application of tempo, slower repetition ranges in the muscles that we want to work to build increased hypertrophy of the slow twitch muscle fibers. So when they do aerobic work, they can last longer, increased capillarization in the muscles. All this stuff all fits together in a structured program to help that athlete perform better. So guys, if you're working with athletes, what you want to do is, first of all, look at where they are from a basic performance level. Are they strong enough to benefit from power training? Are they aerobically fit enough to benefit from interval training? The answer in most questions is going to be no. So build their aerobic base by using sport-specific training in terms of the actual sport itself at a low level for higher periods of time to increase the skill of the activity and the aerobic output. When you look at doing intervals with your clients, start low in terms of build their intensity up to like an 8, 9 out of 10 for anywhere between 8 and 12 seconds, drop it down within a minute and teach them the skill of bringing their heart rate down. And then use your weight training, it's a supplementary tool to it, to increase hypertrophy of slow twitch muscle fibers to build up the aerobic system. In tomorrow's podcast, I'll talk about how we can target the anaerobic system, and then on the next one, we'll talk about the ATP, adenosine triphosphate, phosphate creatine system, and then we'll put it all into one picture. Thanks heaps for listening, guys. Speak soon.